All right, good afternoon. Thank you for choosing our talk at this time. I looked at the schedule and I was amazed always at how many talks are going on simultaneously at the RSA event. So thank you again for joining us here. My name is Steve Sims. This is Eric van Buggenhout. I am the curriculum lead at SANS for the offensive operations curriculum, as well as an author and instructor. I also do a lot of security research, and bug hunting and discovery is my main forte and area of focus. I did a talk this morning actually on bug hunting and how to get started in exploitation. So our talk this afternoon is on purple teaming, specifically building the always on purple team. And I want to say a couple quick things before we actually get started on the presentation. So Eric, I met probably about 10 years ago. He started off teaching some penetration testing courses at SANS and has a ton of experience in the field doing both offensive and defensive practices. And so I've told this story before where I've always been in exploit development and like advanced red teaming and pen testing. That's just like the area that is my calling. I just love that area. I never run out of things to do. And when I teach classes, one of the things I always ask is how many of you in this room are pen testers versus how many of you in this room are defenders or something other than pen testers? And I was always surprised to see that in a class focusing on things like exploit development and advanced penetration testing, that 2/3, typically on average, were not pen testers or red teamers in any way. They're defenders wanting to understand and actually see the attack techniques used and actually get their hands on the keyboard and perform them. Because knowing that in much more detail is, of course, going to allow you to do a much better job at defending. So it got me thinking after a while, well, we don't really have a class, or at the time we don't have a class that is designed and aimed at teaching defenders a little bit of like, okay, here's the attack, because the question would always be, well, how do I prevent that from happening? How do I defend myself? And I would say, well, this is an attack course. We don't really focus on the defenses. So I'm happy to state it verbally, but we don't really have time to go in and get your hands on the keyboards, hardening that system to stop the attack from being successful. But it got me thinking, which was, maybe we need a course like this. So I started to look into the idea of how can we design a course and curriculum around getting defenders the hands-on experience of performing the attack so they really understand it and have done it. But then go and fix it. Understand the mitigations and ways that you can control it, and then even how attackers might be able to circumvent some of those controls. So the focus is more on hardening, which kind of started down the purplish avenue. And so I needed an author to write this course, and Eric, thankfully, was the one who was working in that space already and was very happy to work on that specific course, and has actually written a couple of courses on the purple teaming area. And he is an executive, one of the partners at a company out of Belgium called Inviso. They've got a couple hundred employees doing lots and lots of great security consulting work, focusing on the purple teaming side of things and all. And the last thing I'll say here, because he's going to be doing more talking than me on this, because I consider him a far better expert in this space, even though I've been doing it for quite some time as well. But when COVID hit, they saw an opportunity where more and more companies were looking for automation opportunities with regard to ongoing red teaming, ongoing purple teaming. And what are some of the pros and cons? And can you really do fully automated pen testing and red teaming, or is that not really a thing? So that's my quick introduction and kind of where this talk came from and how we got to this point. And I'll pass it over to Eric to share some words.
So thanks a lot, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and of course with everyone here as well. My first time at RSA, so that's nice. I got this little FT thing on my badge, and I was like, oh, it looks a bit like, oh, it's all very new, all very big too, of course. Like, you know how it is in Belgium, Europe, Brussels. We typically do things a bit smaller. This is, of course, pretty amazing. So on the expertise side of things, I'm very happy that you mentioned that I'm the big authority on purple teaming. But just to give you an idea, when I started doing penetration testing back in 2008, I was like straight out of school, like, oh, security is fun. And they're like, oh, let's do penetration testing. And so the first thing I did was, you know how it goes, right? Nmap, like port scanning in environments, like, ooh. And then you see the system, and I'm like, and then my boss back in the day said like, okay, so now you know that there's a vulnerability, you have to exploit it. I'm like, let's do this. So of course I open up Metasploit. This is 2008. No one had any kind of detections. So I used MS-08067, which is like the gold standard, right? Just boom. I was like, immediately hit the machine, get like an interpreter going, infect the entire thing. It's like, oh, this is easy, right? Little did I know that that was just the very, very much the basics of it all. But it's interesting to see, though, how things have evolved and how we're continuously improving. And you'll see that also during the presentation. I consider myself to be an optimist. I think we are getting better at this as an industry, cybersecurity. Things are getting better. But if you look at where we're coming from and where we're going, that's really an interesting story. We won't talk about disclaimer. I'm sure you can read that. You've seen it probably a few times already this week or today. What do we want to really talk about today? I think we first want to give a small recap of what is purple teaming. So what is it all about? Steve already did a pretty good introduction, but we want to go a bit deeper on the methods behind it and why we're actually doing that. Now, purple teaming, I think, is pretty amazing, but there are, of course, a few things that we can potentially improve. And that's what I want to talk about as well here is okay, but where are we now? Where are we going? And why are we going there? A vision for the future. Should purple teaming be like a one-off thing where you do it once a while, once every quarter, once every year, depending on what compliance tells you what to do? Or can we actually make it into a function, something you do on a continuous basis? Can we integrate into, well, SecOps, right? Is it a SOC thing? Can the SOC actually run this kind of stuff? I have an opinion on that. I'm curious to hear yours or to see what you think about that. And then, of course, indeed, questions. So if you have any things that you want to share with us, remarks, questions, very happy to also answer those. So first up, a small recap on purple teaming. What is it and why do we do it? Common goal, right? Red, blue, they have one common goal, and that goal is making sure that they're basically improving the organization's security posture. Now, I can say that, and probably most of you would say, but of course, Eric, right? That's very common sense. But you would be surprised how many organizations or how many teams sometimes forget about that. And I do think it's very key to understand, because unless, of course, you're in an, let's say, an organization which requires an offensive capability, let's say government, military, usually the only purpose that you have a red team is to make the blue team better, right? That's why you have it. So there is one big goal, and that's improving the organization's security posture. Of course, red side, you have the adversary emulation, penetration testing, blue team side, hardening, detection, response, and so on. How could this potentially go wrong? The red edition first. So what if these teams are not fully aligned or communicating? Imagine the following thoughts. The red team report has many vulnerabilities, so it's a job well done. Right? I've been there. I've been a penetration tester. I've done red teams. Imagine that you spend 2 weeks of work and you're doing like this security assessment. You're trying to poke holes into an organization's like overall posture, but you don't find any critical issues. Chances are low, but could happen. It feels bad, right? So if you get a report, if you can deliver a report with a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, it feels good, right? So kind of like as a red team, you're actually happy that you find all of these issues. So it creates this kind of a dynamic where you're basically enjoying the failures of the blue team. And I'm over-exaggerating this, of course, a bit, but it's a mindset, right? It's a thing that lives. And then you get that, right? I won't share too much with the blue team. I have to protect the secret sauce, right? Because next year I want to come back and do the same thing again. But yeah, that's true. I see where it's coming from, but it's not what you should be doing, right? Try to help them. And how do you measure the success of a red team? Again, it's easy to say as a red team, or easy. It's very visible if the red team got domain admin access. You probably say, impressive, well done. But is it? I don't know. Maybe there's 30 different ways of getting domain admin and they found one. It's nice, okay, I don't know. So how do you measure that really? Because isn't it about improving stuff? So are we really giving the right recommendations? Are we helping this organization improve? And that, of course, relates to that last one. I got domain admin access, time to get a coffee, relax a bit, things are done. But did you actually figure out the biggest priorities? Are you really focusing on the biggest vulnerabilities and issues that this organization has? Turn that to the blue team side. We don't see a lot of alerts, right? There's not a lot of alerts. Our preventive controls are doing great, right? We're stopping everything. It's perfectly fine. But do you have the right visibility? Do you actually know that do you have the right use cases in place? Do you have the right log sources feeding your SIEM, XDR, EDR. I'm sure that this week you'll figure out about all of the new security products and things that we have, but I couldn't put them all on there, but simply put, are you sure you have the right visibility? Do you have the right coverage? Are you actually triggering the right alerts? But here, a same kind of dynamic could live. Blue team thinking, but why should I work with this red team, guys? Because next, if I tell them about this vulnerability, and maybe I ask some of their assistants, maybe I ask some of their support. I'm like, hey, can you help me with this? How can I improve this? But by revealing a potential vulnerability to the red team, you might be scared that they might use it against you in the next quarterly assessment, right? So it's also a tricky dynamic there. The other side, the last one there is, of course, plenty of alerts. Detections are working great. Look at how many alerts we have. And you've got like thousands of them. I've seen these cases. It's always pretty interesting to see how that works. Now, that's a very quick intro on why or the potential issues that you could have if you don't have a formal idea of how will we do purple teaming. So making red a bit more purple. How can you get the red team to a level where they can better help the blue team? I think first of all, understand prevention, detection, and response against the TTPs that they execute. Now, there's many, to be fair, if I look at some of the red team research that you find online, if you look at what Steve's doing, it's quite impressive work. The stuff that they find, the stuff that they do. These days, it's all about EDR bypasses and stuff as well. So you've got all of the, like messing with the telemetry, basically getting rid of, for example, the kernel callbacks, the userland API hooks that EDRs put in place. All of it is very impressive. But it's also important that red team, that they actually understand about defenses, because you need to advise that blue team. You need to make sure that they do the right things. A very simple and classic example, I always use this, so depends on how many times we've interacted, maybe you've heard me say this before, but is an SMB relay. It's a perfect example of how this could go wrong. So red team comes in, does a number of different things, and they do some SMB relaying throughout the environment. That's nice. Okay, perfect. So that's something that's bad, right? You don't want them to do that. How do you fix that? Anyone? So how do you stop an SMB relay? It's an old thing, right? It's an old technique, but it's better. Now everyone's Googling. We're just like, Eric, we're here to listen, so you tell us, right? Okay. It's probably one of the two. Never mind. How could you stop it? Well, if I Google it, I will be able to tell you that I could implement something like SMB signing. I can implement SMB signing. Fine. I put some GPOs in place, SMB signing, done. And then the data center goes on fire, right? And everyone calls you like, what the hell did you do? Because it's tricky. SMB signing has issues with legacy protocols, performance impact. There's, I think, a documented document, so a documented article by Microsoft, which says that if you enable SMB signing, you're looking at the potential performance impact of about 15%, 1.5. It's not too bad, but it could be bad. Depends on what you're doing, right? If you're using SMB to do copies and stuff like that, could be a pretty big impact. Now, how valuable is it for a red team to come in, do an SMB relay, and then tell you, hey guys, you should enable SMB signing? Thanks. We could have Googled that, right? But important there, understand those limitations. Technically, it's easy to do, but can you actually do it? How can you practically implement this? And if you cannot prevent it, can you potentially implement some detections? Can you find telemetry that will tell you that someone is abusing this? That's the second part as well there. Presenting the known TTPs, of course, you want to present that to the blue team to say, look, guys, this is what's happening in the industry. These are the things that are moving. You want to be aware of these new TTPs to make sure that they can also track their use cases, their detections. Are they aware of what's happening? And of course, innovate the red team approach, make sure there's continuous improvement. If you keep on getting back into the same organization with the same tricks, are you really doing a good job? If every year it's the same thing, oh, yes, I can still get in, oh, I can still use Responder, LMNR, things like that. It's like, you have this list, I often mention that, is how to getting domain admin before lunch. It's like this trick box that a lot of pen testers and red teamers know very well. It's things like responder-style tactics, and this is a bit beyond the presentation, but it's very often a limited series of tricks that are very impactful. And it's important to actually help organizations to know about these. What are these big issues that you want to get rid of? that will stop a lot of these red team attacks in their tracks, if you will. So.
One thing interesting too is I've said this before, a lot of other pen testers I've heard say the same thing, is where we being red teamers, pen testers, we think we're so stealthy, we think we're like ninjas going through the network, and because we've gotten away with it so much, I've made so much noise that anybody, even if you're not paying attention to logs, should have seen something because we were so noisy. So we think we're all stealthy, but that's just because the organizations, in a lot of cases that we've tested, are really bad at logging, and they have the logs, but they're not doing anything with them. They don't have a properly set up SOC, they're not capturing the right things. So once you actually take the time to look at the artifacts that you leave behind, the forensic footprint, if you want to call it that, you realize just how noisy you are and how easy it is to really capture that data. It's obviously difficult to then triage and create the dashboards and all the things that come with it to set up a proper SOC, but we are very noisy. So understanding as a red teamer what noise we do make, what footprints we leave behind, allows us to tune our work to get better. So like Eric was saying, we need to understand you hear offense informs defense all the time. Offensive people need to understand the defensive tooling so that we can get better at our craft and understand how to get around. So we're supposed to be working together. In red teaming especially, and just in red in general, in pen testing, anything offensive related, and oftentimes in security in general, there's a lot of ego with some people, which is a shame. But there's often some ego there. And historically, the red and the blue sides weren't so good at communicating, often reporting to different reporting structures or hierarchies in the organization, but as Eric said as well, trying to accomplish the same goal. Purple teaming is still relatively new in the realm of other things that are more mature out there, and it's one of those cases where, I'll give another example, network access control or network admission control, NAC. That's a solution that has one name, but many different meanings out there depending on who you ask. Right now, purple teaming, if you Google it, means so many things. It's difficult. It's almost like we're all thankful that the MITRE and these different frameworks and such come out that allow us to speak the same language. With the purple teaming side, we're still relatively new in that space. And so a lot of what we want to talk about here and what we're demonstrating and showcasing in this first section is kind of like where we are today and where we want to get.
So making blue a bit more red, same thing there. It's the other side. So how can we get the blue team? And this is, as Steve very nicely put it, offense informs defense. That's been around for a while. Like red talks to blue about, hey, these are things to be aware about. These are things to be careful about. Absolutely, this is a bit more well known. But here, again, understand how controls and detections can contribute to protect against TTPs. For example, we all know Mimikatz. We've seen it. I guess you've all seen it. Hopefully not on your machines. Or maybe on your machines if you're a red teamer. But, I mean, how can you successfully block the techniques which you can execute with Mimikatz? For example, credential dumping from LSAS. I like to use this as a good example. It's important to understand as a blue teamer why you implement something like Credential Guard, for example, right? Credential Guard, this is really the control that Microsoft has pushed to make sure that this whole Mimikatz craziness has much less of an impact. And it's a pretty effective control. Is it 100% bulletproof? It's a cat and mouse game. Things evolve, but it's a very solid control and it breaks a lot of the traditional attack strategies. But it's important as a blue team that you're actually aware of that. It's like, this Credential Guard is actually a pretty important one because it might be one of the 100 different hardening controls that you're going to implement because of compliance reasons, because you get told to implement a certain standard. Fine, but do you actually know that this one out of the 100 has the most impact on actually stopping attacks? That's super important to know and to be aware about. Testing individual TTPs. And there again, it amazes me. Like a red team typically should not come with a lot of surprises. Well, there will be some surprises, right? Surprise? Okay. I'm also, you may not have noticed yet, but I like to call myself a failed comedian, although the failed is a bit between. So I do my best. I'll just throw in one quick joke before I continue. Did you hear that this big lawsuit here in San Francisco, apparently, where there's a bunch of developers who are being accused of writing terrible code. So I tried to talk to them when they were leaving the courtroom, but they didn't want to comment. I do my best. There you go. But so testing individual TTPs, because let's take Mimikatz. I dump credentials from Elsass. Nice, that's one individual technique. It's a TTP. It's a MITRE ATT&CK, obviously. Do you have to hire an expensive red team to tell you whether or not that one works, and two, whether you would detect it? It's arguable. You need to hire a red team to actually tell you how resilient you are against a certain adversary, against a certain threat scenario, right? Because that's the whole point of a red team. They come in with a lot of expertise, with a lot of experience to showcase that they can actually bypass your controls and get to your crown jewels. And that's the value of a red team. That's why you pay a red team. You don't pay a red team to run Mimikatz and tell you that you didn't see it. I mean, that's something you could potentially do yourself. So obviously, track and report on detection and response coverage, that goes a bit back to what Steve was saying. We should all talk the same language, and we should all have a way of expressing ourselves. And MITRE ATT&CK is just, it's a godsend for that. It's just amazing. It works really well. And of course, we've all heard about MITRE ATT&CK.
That was last year.
That was last year, yes. Continuous testing of TTPs, and that's actually where we're going with this talk. I think that's where there's a lot of value, is to implement this in a much more continuous way, to do this in a way where it's not just a snapshot. Because any kind of assessment you do one-off, it's a snapshot. It tells you now, today, this instant, that's the state of this thing in your environment. But tomorrow, who knows, right? So red and purple each have their place. So that's also important to note, because sometimes red teamers are like, what are they saying? We're not important anymore, it's all about purple. No, of course. Red versus blue, the traditional style, that's still fine. I mean, let's face it. If you're dealing with certain adversaries, that could be nation state, cybercrime gangs, whatever it is, they're not going to call you first, right? To say, hey, you want to do a red-blue thing? So it's normal that the red team does do things suddenly, by surprise. And absolutely, so that's fine. But important, if you do traditional red versus blue, that's what we call an assessment, right? Seeing how good you are doing. What you want to do with purple teaming is continuous improvement. You want to put those teams together, work together side by side, and improve things. And then you get all the complaints on, it's not realistic because you have red and blue working together and it's not, yeah, absolutely, it's not realistic, but it's also not an assessment. It's about continuous improvement. And you sometimes get, but Eric, we're not ready for purple teaming. We're doing red teaming. Say, okay. That's kind of like saying, I might confuse you if I don't say this right. It's kind of like saying, I'm not ready to study, I'm doing the exam. That's kind of like and that's very weird, right? It's like, okay, but you're doing red team, okay, every year, red team, red team, red team, and you keep on getting smashed. It's like, okay, we're doing red teams. So yeah, there's something to be said for that. It's continuous improvement. That is really the point of purple teaming. Okay.
One last thing I want to jump on here. Eric mentioned Credential Guard as an example of a mitigation and how that's important, and it's a solid control. One thing, having been teaching for over 10 years for SANS and just working on so many engagements, offensive people obviously like to get very technical, very deep into the weeds, because oftentimes they have to, especially if you're getting into things like binary exploitation and other types of low-level attacks. And you always hear offense informs defense. But what I learned a lot, I did say before that we do have people coming to offensive courses to learn from a high level kind of what's going on. But we need more defenders, more people on the blue side to go and research and understand the technical details of these types of solutions and mitigations. That's what's going to make you a lot better and more effective as a defender. In order to be purple, you've got to take that on. You've got to become a bit red in order to be effective. So example that Eric mentioned was Credential Guard. Credential Guard is part of Microsoft's VBS, virtualization-based security, that utilizes Hyper-V and virtualization. You actually shim in and ring -1 a hypervisor between the kernel and the hardware. You actually have a second kernel instance called a secure kernel and a completely separate operating system basically running with something called isolated user mode processes. So LSASS, which is the local security authority subsystem where your credentials are typically stored, that's what Mimikatz exploits. It like injects itself in there to grab the credentials. If someone runs Mimikatz against a system running Credential Guard, LSASS is there, but it's empty. There's actually a second process called, in an isolated user mode process, called something like LSAIO, I can't remember, and it's not accessible. In order to get over there to it, it's encrypted as well. you need to go through a broker through the hypervisor. And there's all these different mitigations out there that Microsoft has worked so hard on introducing into the operating system as part of things like Microsoft Windows Defender Exploit Guard. It used to be called the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit. There's over 20 mitigations that are not turned on. You have to go and turn them on, which requires admins to go and understand them at a very low level. It's one of the things we talk about in a lot of the courses that cover this topic area. So my point being, I just heard that as like a buzzword almost and wanted to jump on it to say, to be good at purple, we need defenders to be really good at offense, just like we need offense to be really good at defense. It's not a separate team. You're not hiring more people. It's these teams working together in a cohesive manner and respecting each other's craft.
So here we see purple teaming and the current state of purple teaming, if you will. It's gaining traction, and I think that's nice. The whole red versus blue, the fact that they don't want to really work together, you see it disappearing more and more, so that's good. Again, I'm an optimist. We're always improving. But you see, and that's actually what Steve mentioned, you see how we're so well aligned. Red and blue, and then everyone talks about something different. What is purple teaming? I could probably ask everyone here in the room. I'm not going to do that because we have limited time, but I will get very different answers. Here's 3 ideas on what I sometimes see or hear. You've got level 1, which is like, oh yeah, we do purple teaming. So how does it work? Well, we run a red team, and then at the end, we do a replay workshop with the blue team. So at the end of the red team, we get the blue team involved, and we basically tell them how we destroyed them. It's like, look at this. Very nice. I'm joking a bit. Of course, you give some advice. You do like, look, this is what we did, detection, response, right? These are some ideas, use cases you could build for detection or ways to deal with this. Absolutely, but it's still relatively limited. I call that a red team with some blue addition. You basically bolt on some blue on it, and it looks purple. It's not bad, but you can do much more. The second one would be dedicated purple team exercises. So really say from the get-go, we put red and blue in a room together and they work together. You see those acronyms that are like PTF, vector, it's like, what is he saying? So this is the purple team exercise framework, and there's also vector. That's not an acronym, it's a tool. But those are tools that I'll just demonstrate in a second. They're used to basically guide this kind of exercises. But the point being there, as of the get-go, you identify this as a purple team exercise. So it's an improvement, it's something to work together. It's not red versus blue. But it's still a one-off engagement, right? Then we get to level 3, continuous purple teaming. That's really where you start doing it on a more continuous basis, always on. And we'll go into quite some detail about what that means. But there you see tools coming in like BAS, breach attack simulation. You see automation coming in there. So that's a big part of it. And that's the potential for really getting it into security operations, having it as a core function of what the SOC actually is doing. And that I think is really, really interesting. And you see that that's where we're going, and that's pretty exciting. So this is the blue addition to a red team exercise. As you can see, I'll be brief, but phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that's basically your typical red teaming, right? How a typical red team would work. You select a scenario, you execute it, and then you report on it. But then at the end, you just add like a replay workshop to basically say, hey, here are some ideas for prevention and detection. Not bad, but to be fair, this is what I would actually expect in a normal red team. Right? Red versus blue, fine. But then at the end, just do a replay workshop to actually tell the blue team what they could do and how could they make this better. Level 2, this is really the whole continuous thing. You can see there, this is where red and blue work together. So you can see the amazing color work there with like red, blue, and then purple. But so it starts with the red team saying, hey, look guys, this is the TTP that we're going to emulate. That's what it looks like. So you got Steve saying, hey, I'm going to exploit your system, that's what it's going to look like. And then you got the blue team sitting there, okay, I think what you're gonna do, it's gonna work, or it's not gonna work, because we have a certain control in place. Like, you're gonna dump credentials from LSAS, we have Credential Guard, so it should not work. So you discuss expected controls, but also detections. We have a use case for that. That specific MITRE ATT&CK technique, we should have a detection use case for that. Or EDR should protect us against that. Now, one of my pet peeves, it's sometimes hard to get this kind of coverage, right? To know what's being done. And especially when you're dealing with like commercial products that you bought and that you're just using out of the box. I have no issue with commercial products. Of course not. We all need them to do what we're doing, right? But have you ever asked your EDR vendor, okay, but what kind of telemetry do you generate? How do you develop your detections? They don't like to answer that, right? Because it's, well, it's their product, right? They build it, and I get it somewhat, right? They have a lot of IP, they do things. They have a certain way of doing that on how they generate the detection, but they typically don't want to say too much about it. That's a bit annoying, right? But okay. You emulate the TTP, so you actually execute that attack technique. The blue team then finds evidence, says, okay, let's have a look. Do we get an alert? Do we see something? And then you present it. Look, we got an alert for that. Okay, we document that. So we say, yes, that TTP, we saw it, or didn't work because we have a control for that. Implement short-term fixes. That could be, maybe you have a detection use case which didn't trigger. So you basically fine-tune the use case to make sure that it now triggers. And you also probably document longer-term actions like, oh, they dumped credentials from LSAS. We should probably implement Credential Guard, but that's probably not something you'll do tomorrow. Right? Just a small GPO change, no issue. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but just a short note, but this is the Purple Team exercise framework. It's actually being written by George Orchiles. So he's actually in the Purple Team. I think they have it's just after this presentation, they have like it's a panel discussion on purple teaming as well. So that's part of his work. Then you've got Vector. This is a pretty interesting tool. So what is Vector? It's actually designed to help purple team exercises to perform documentation. So it doesn't do like attacks. This is a free tool. It's actually made by Security Risk Advisors, which is a cybersecurity firm. They do consulting, they do services, and a big part of what they do is purple teaming. So what they've done is actually written a tool where you can document both parts. So you can just show, look, this is what the red team did. So they document like this is the command that we ran. And the blue team can then also document what they're seeing, what they're observing. The idea is to make this repeatable, to make this easy to document. Even, and you don't see it, I know, on the screen, and it's not meant for you to be seen. It's my secret. No, it's just a bit small, but that's fine. But on the blue team side, you can document things like what tool detected that attack. Because you now emulated something, you did something, right? You ran an attack, but did your SIEM catch it? Did your EDR catch it? And you can document it. So if you do this continuously, what you'll also start getting out of a tool like this is, hey, in the vast majority of attacks that we run, the EDR is spotting it, or the SIEM, right? But you start getting kind of a feeling like, where is the value, right? Where do we get the best bang for our buck? That's pretty interesting as well. So that's another interesting insight that you can get. Now, this is really where we need to be. Everything that we've discussed before, that works. I encourage it. It's definitely not bad. But it's all about snapshots. You do an assessment now, and you know how things are going. Tomorrow, who knows? Who knows what happens? You might have a log source which stops reporting. Maybe there's a system who didn't correctly apply GPOs. So it's actually not protected, but you thought it was. So you need to find a way to do this more. And you could say, let's do it every week. Yes, fine. It's not like we have too few security people, right? So let's just throw 100 security people at this problem. It's going to go away. We do it every week. But that requires time, expertise, right? Because you need people who actually understand both the red and blue side. It's never going to work. So how can we do this in a cost-effective way, in a continuous mode? Bad attempt at a joke, but okay, there you go. I'll have one more for you, don't worry. Now everyone starts worrying. He's like, oh no. Do we have to stay in here? Yes. Lock the door, please. I'm obviously kidding before I get into trouble here, but a vision for the future. So integrating purple teaming in security operations. So can you automate a red team? I don't think so. Not yet, right? Who knows what ChatGPT is going to do next? There are, the AutoGPT stuff. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but there are some. You've got Pentest GPT now already. It's getting somewhere, but what it's basically already doing is like, look, it can Nmap or it can port scan like a Metasploitable box, which is a vulnerable machine by design, and then it can start attacking it. Somewhat, but it's of course not yet at the level of what you would want for a red team, because what you need is an adaptable level of stealth or complexity. And what I mean by that is, imagine an organization which has no security maturity. They have never really invested in that, and that's fine. But then if you're going to then hit them with like a red team, which is, as Steve likes to call them, ninjas, who are all like, they've all got their own, they do EDR bypasses, they're basically doing all, they're using 0 days, right? So they've developed their own exploits, they're doing, so how is that gonna look? Pretty bad. It's also not very useful, because for that organization which has 0 maturity, they don't need to know how well they're defended against nation-state style attacks, right? It's not relevant for them. What they need to know is if a ransomware actor accidentally gets in because someone clicks a phishing link, can we actually recover from that? So you need to have an adaptable level of stealth or complexity in a red team. You also want to, of course, have them creatively work around controls that have been put in place by the blue team, and at the end, propose effective recommendations that can actually be applied. That's the whole value of a red team. Can you automate that? Not yet. But can you automate execution of a series of TTPs? Absolutely. That's where I don't see any issues. I think that's fair game. That's not something that's that hard to do. Enter breach attack simulation tools. We are at the height of the hype cycle at the moment. So what does that mean? Well, this is the hype cycle by Gartner for security operations. If you're not familiar with it, what it does is basically Gartner predicts these are upcoming technologies or things. And where are they in that hype cycle? Now, hype cycle, you've got a number of different phases in there. The innovation trigger, which is basically the start of it. It's like, oh, look, there's this new idea, new technology. Then you've got the peak of inflated expectations, which is basically, this is going to solve all of our problems. And then you've got the, I don't know how to pronounce it, the trough, basically the valley of disillusionment, I'll call it that way, where everyone thinks, okay, this is bad, doesn't really work. It's not what we thought it was. But then, if the technology survives, or if that ID survives, you get into the slope of enlightenment, where people start understanding, it's actually useful, but only for X, Y, Z. And then you get into the plateau of productivity, where it's a generally accepted standard, and people know this is how it works, that's what we can expect of it. You can see that BAS it's like on the roller coaster, right? It's going to go, I don't know, right? We'll see how it goes. XDR is there too, so it's good fun. We'll see how that's going to go. But it does mean that a lot of people have these big expectations now. I don't have that many big expectations of breach attack simulation tools. I think they're very useful, but I don't expect them to do an automatic red team, because that's never going to happen.
Yeah, and something I'll jump on there as well. Like MITRE ATT&CK, what is the tool that they have?
Caldera.
Caldera. Like if you've heard of Caldera before, that's an example of a tool where it takes the TTPs, it takes an APT group, whatever you want to select, and you can basically say, go act as if you are this APT. And it will do the credential dumping. It'll try to do lateral movement using just generic techniques. It's similar to, and that's a free product, and then there's a lot of vendors out there who sell those types of products that work basically as like an implant. You're installing something intentionally in your environment that is going to try and automatically laterally move and exploit things in data exfiltration. Some of them are better than others. But a lot of the defensive tooling and such is around those known products, those known signatures, those known behaviors, which of course is out of the box. If you're doing just a little bit of work, it should block it from being successful, or at least detect it and let you know what's going on. So there's a lot of companies out there and people like myself investing time into writing your own custom implants. That's going to be a lot more difficult for someone to detect. And some of the more mature organizations that I've come across where I've been caught pretty quickly, and you know, it's okay to be caught, you want to be caught, and in a lot of cases we say, awesome job, you caught us, now let us continue. Because maybe somebody else wouldn't have gotten caught, or maybe if I did a different technique, you wouldn't have seen that. So still let me continue to give you the full value and demonstrate the full impact of what I'm capable of potentially doing. And so some of the more mature organizations I've seen out there, and you've heard me say this before, actually set up like a proper adversary emulation pipeline where they take representative systems in the organization, they intentionally have some tooling running, some things running. They have it instrumented as well. What does instrumentation mean in this case? Meaning like a bunch of sensors set up on it, and it's expecting to see certain types of behaviors. When those behaviors occur, the sensor picks it up, it delivers it to your SOC by whatever way you have set up, triage, get it up onto the dashboard, and you know that these systems are there. You know that they're representative systems that are intentionally being compromised. And it's just demonstrating that your pipeline works, that you are detecting these types of negative events that you want to see. It's going to a dashboard that's known that these systems are in fact not a risk to the organization. And if all that's working, if one of these negative events happens on a system that's not one of those intentionally instrumented representative systems, then you know you've got a problem. That something is then being detected that is something you want to act on. So again, going back to my earlier point of really understanding at a low technical level what these attacks are actually doing so that you can not just rely on basic signatures and such.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't want to. I already clicked. It's like, I'm trigger happy, right? Supporting architecture. Because as Steve mentioned, again, perfect example, Caldera. It's a tool that we can use to emulate these TTPs. More on what kind of tools we can use for that in a second. But imagine your current, of course, as we are all mature organizations in this room, we all have what it takes to properly defend against cyber threats, right? So we've actually solved the problem. We can close the conference. We can all go home. So that's perfect. But we're not there yet. But quick note on the support architecture. What do you think? What would you need in order to do this properly? You, of course, have your infrastructure. You've got EDR tooling in place, potentially. You've got some network visibility. You're actually collecting logs, raw logs from your systems, all fine. So you send that to a SIEM, all good. But what you get out of that from a SIEM then, typically security events, right? You get like, there's use cases which trigger, which are then picked up potentially by a SOAR platform, like a security orchestration, automated response tool. What are those tools? There's a couple of them out there. There's Simplify, there's things like Swimlane, there's XOR, the Palo Alto product. So there's a whole bunch of these out there. But the idea is that they help you to standardize workflows, to automate parts of what you're doing. That's the whole purpose of having them, right? But in that whole flow, add a BAS tool, for example, breach attack simulation tool. How can it help? Well, imagine that you instrument that. You have your SOAR platform say, look, okay, run this TTP on that specific host. Run attack 123 on that host. But if you have done this right in your architecture, you would also be feeding all of your security events into the SOAR, right? Because the SOAR is actually going to be, well, the heart of your SOC. It's the security operations, right? That's where everything happens. So it orchestrates between those different technologies. So run technique 123 on host A. And then the SOAR can sit back, wait a few minutes, and then check, okay, do I see any alerts coming from the EDR or from the SIEM or for any other detection tool that I have for technique 123 on host A? If not, guess what? Didn't work out, right? There's something up. We didn't see a detection for that. So that's how you can start building this in a pretty automated way. You can start getting this in a continuous mode. So what are some of the best tool examples? Some free tools out there. There's Caldera. That's the big one probably to mention here. It's supported and developed by MITRE. Of course, MITRE you've seen. They're the ones who develop Attack. Of course, they're here as well. They have a booth. They also have that tool. Pretty impressive. There's Prelude. Prelude Operator is another tool which has a community edition available. And there's Atomic Red Team, which is more a collection of what we call atomic tests. So they have those little small TTPs that you can execute. And that's what we would say are the typically partially free tools, if you will. Of course, there's also commercial vendors who offer solutions for this. Attack IQ is very big in the space. There's Picus, Simulate, SafeBreach. Mandiant has a big solution for that as well. To be fair, this is, it's not exhaustive. There's more of them. So what I do think, and this is important for me to mention, is that what tools should you use? Well, it depends. If you're not sure you're going to do this, then probably don't invest in a huge, big tool just yet, but already start playing with the approach. Can this work in your organization? Because the value of most of these is the library of TTPs that they come with, right? Because essentially what these tools are doing, they're basically backdoors on your system. And that sounds bad, but I don't mean it like that. But what they do is they execute TTPs in your environment. So they execute these type of attacks in a controlled, safe way on your environment. But okay, I can do that myself, potentially. More on that in a second. But so the big value for me is how many TTPs do they come built in with? Do I have to still write all of those attack techniques myself? That would be a bit of a mess. Here you can see an example of what we call an ability. I know it's a bit hard to read, but what does that say? I think it's actually fairly readable, but it's mostly encapsulations of a series of OS commands that are being executed. Right? That's a TTP, because that's also what a threat actor would do. Threat actor would run a certain attack. They would run a number of different commands. So what you would have in such a TTP, that's an example of a format that's actually used by both Caldera and Prelude Operator. It's a YAML file, for those who are familiar with that. It's a YAML format. So what do you see in there? A bit of information about what is the technique that you're executing, and then just a number of OS commands which are going to be executed by the BAS tool. Can we build this ourselves? Absolutely. I like building stuff. Time check.
Time check.
Eric, shut up. XOR, central orchestrator, SOAR platform, right? Then we need something for remote execution. WinRM, PSExec, stuff like that, right? Why not WMI? Who knows? We'll figure it out. A library of TTPs, like Atomic Red Team. And a bunch of duct tape. Mostly important. So, how could that work? Can that work? Well, absolutely, of course it can work. This is what that would look like. So here you have an operator, someone running these kind of TTPs, and they're building basically a playbook. The screenshot that you see there, that's what a typical SOAR platform would look like. You see like the steps, and you see how they're being executed. So what are we doing here? We're designing a series of TTPs to be emulated, an emulation plan, and then we're implementing those in a playbook on the SOAR platform, leveraging, for example, Atomic Red Team. So just saying, okay, let's take the Atomic Red Teams, all freely available tools, except for the SOAR platform in this case, but just to give you an idea of how you could start playing with this yourself. The playbook then executes those TTPs on the target host using, for example, WinRM. Fine. But this is where the magic happens. Next step. Because executing it is not that hard. But because the SOAR platform is there and you're actually also pulling in all of your detections, you can now just create a dashboard which also tells you, look, you emulated that plan, those 10 techniques that you had in the plan, that's how you're doing on a detection basis, right? That's what you're seeing there. How many of these TTPs that you're executing are you detecting? And all of that, very easy to automate. But imagine, right? You can do this every day, every night if you want to. So this is where we get to continuous. It's no longer a snapshot. It's no longer, we did the red team last year and we were fine. Yeah, what about today? This gives you a solution to do this much faster and much more continuous. So we're almost there, so don't worry. I have the timing perfectly under control. Suggested approach for red versus blue teaming. Where do we go from here? Continue doing red versus blue. It's fine. It's really good. But add stuff. Instead of just doing a replay workshop, how about at the end of the red versus blue, you say, okay, dear red team, maybe you hired a consultant to do it, maybe you did it yourself, it's fine, but ask your red team to come up with a clear attack plan. This is what they did. These are the 10 TTPs that they executed. Okay, bonus points if they can implement those TTPs in your best tool. Right? Maybe you're using Atomic Red Team, maybe you're using a commercial tool already, that's fine, but ask the red team, hey guys, can you implement these techniques in our best tool now? So that we can now have this in an automated way. So next month, we can execute exactly what you guys did. Boom. Is that valuable? Yes. Is it the same as a red team? No, because they're doing exactly the same as what the red team did before. But it's nice to see, okay, did you improve? Did you already fix this? Because the next time the red team comes back, you can tell them, okay, you did these 10 techniques previously, last quarter. We now automated them. So now every month we get a small report saying whether we're defended against it or not. You guys now emulate something else, something new. Right? So you keep on continuous improvement so things start rolling. Something similar for detection engineering. So if you are building your own detections, which mature organizations typically do, they have some engineers looking at overall detection capability, they look at telemetry, they figure out new ways to implement detections. And what they often do when testing those detections is they usually test it for false positives. Right? If you have a new rule and it generates 1 million of alerts, you probably don't want to push that to production just yet. But it's usually a bit trickier to see, does it actually trigger when it should trigger? So implement that also in your pipelines, right? If you're doing detection engineering, test those rules. Test them also to make sure that they're actually triggering when they should be triggering. And you can do it in an automatic way because you have, okay, 10 different TTPs. Let's just run that and see if our tool is actually triggering on that. There also, do they continue working? Because maybe it worked when you initially implemented the rule, but is it still working? So that's also nice that you actually do this in let's say a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and so on. There we go. Some conclusions. As we mature purple teaming, which I think we should stop looking at it as a one-off engagement, right? It's not a one-off thing. It's a mentality. It's a way of life, right? That's what you would say. But important is you should do it continuously. And I've actually seen this in quite a few of the talks and the keynotes throughout the event here. There's many references to continuous, automate, always on. It's all because we need to be continuous. That's the whole point. We cannot do this one-off. The adversary also doesn't operate one-off. They do this on a continuous basis. Second, the red team should chill, relax. You will not be replaced. Not yet. A little while longer. No, but there is definitely a place for high-value periodic red teams. Of course, if you're a red teamer and you're not providing high value, But then probably there is another issue that you should address. But there's always a place for that, absolutely, because you need someone who can actually emulate a realistic threat actor. That's perfectly fine. You can leverage a variety of different toolings. I am not advising you to now run out and buy the first best tool that you see. Of course not. You need to think about this first. How are you going to use that? How does it fit in the global picture, the overall view? Because if you're not going to be using it, and if you're not going to be improving stuff, then why the hell would you buy the tool? So you need to really think about, okay, how are we going to use that? And it's a strong enabler for continuous improvement because it's just it's continuous TTP prevention detection, as we've already discussed. Final slide. I was forced to add an apply slide, so there you go. No, I'm kidding. It's part of the template, but I think it's valuable. Very nice to see how can you apply this if you go back to your organizations. Assess the viability of this. If you're not there yet, that's fine, but start with the basics. Walk before you run. So can you already do that? What kind of purple teaming do you already do? Do you have anything already? Is it just red teaming that you're doing? Or maybe you're not even doing adversary emulation. Fine, but then start with that first. What is the maturity of your security operations? If you don't have like orchestrations tools like a SOAR and you're not doing detection engineering and stuff, you should probably also ask yourself, is it that valuable to start doing this? Because this is really, it's at the higher levels of the maturity, the peak of maturity, if you will, because you need to be continuously improving. If you're not, then this is not going to add that much value to everything. What's the appetite of the organization to continuously improve? If it's more about compliance, then I don't know whether that's going to be very useful. So I think this is also important to note. And I guess start somewhere is also an important one to mention. There we go. Perfect. Any questions?
I didn't think about that there. No, we're good. All right, thank you very much. If you have questions, we're happy to hang out and chat, though. Thank you so much. Well, one more joke.
Maybe.
Just kidding.
Thanks.